Okie dokie. I'm going to explain a little bit how I get the Goodletite into a polished condition. So it all starts with these diamond discs. The cutting phase is the first phase. So I start with a 80 grit, which is a really coarse grit, and I'm using a flat lap machine. So the diamond disc sits on top, it spins. Stop that, it spins around and round and round, obviously, and I am placing the Goodletite on the surface and slowly grinding down the shape that I want. So I'm up to 600 grit already. So I've started at 80 and then 180, then 400, and now 600 grit. So I'll just do a couple of seconds of work on the 600 grit, and then I'll explain why these diamond discs are so important and how the difference between cutting and then the smoothing phase, which comes after this. So I'll just get some water running here. We'll give it a spin, a few seconds. Okay, so I would be doing that for, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes or so. That was just a few seconds. And you can see, as long as the stone is still wet, it looks really good. I mean, it kind of looks finished. But appearances can be deceiving when you're still doing the cutting. And that is why it's also important to have something to dry. So now I'm going to dry the Goodletite and show you what it looks like dry. And you'll see why it's so important. Let's get a bit more light over here. So now I've lost all that luster because the water is gone. It's looking pretty dull. So after the 600, then I'm going to move up to 1200 grit. Now 1200 is the last of the cutting phases. So I'm continuing to cut, and we're a long way off from the stone having the finish I want. But the idea is to constantly remove scratches. And so far it looks okay, but you can see here I've got some dead areas, some flat areas here. So I'm going to have to keep going on the 600 grit and try and get this whole area here completely flat, and then visually checking for scratches, and then I move up to the 1200 grit. So I'm just going to work on this now, and then we'll come back and I'll show you the 1200 grit cutting phase. So let's bring the Goodletite off the lap disc now. That's 1200 grit, and that's basically the end of the cutting phase. And you can see, as long as it's wet, it actually looks like it's almost polished, but that is misleading because the water is doing that. So this is also why it's really important to dry between phases, so you can actually get a better appreciation for how well the stone is being prepared. So that's what I'm doing now. Just give it a dry with a bit of paper. Grab another piece as well, just to make absolutely certain of it. So what I'm looking for now is major scratches, which I don't see. You can see there are these vertical lines down the stone. They're just the bald spots created by the disc. Those will come out for the most part during the smoothing phase, so they don't bother me, and I don't see any major scratches. So that's the really important thing with these diamond discs, is to get rid of scratches, which I think I've done. It's just the bald spots. Okay, so now why do I use diamond disc and not sandpaper? The main reason being is that fuchsite is soft, and the tourmaline and the corundum, or the ruby, that is in the Goodletite stone, they have different hardnesses. And if you use sandpaper, the sandpaper, because it's pliable and soft, it will tend to groove out the fuchsite and leave the tourmaline, and then you'll end up with a stone where the tourmaline is raised above the surface and the fuchsite is gouged out, and you don't get a flat surface, which means you don't get a good polish. So this is why I use the diamond discs, because they are very hard, and the diamond disc will cut the tourmaline and the fuchsite to the same plane. It cuts both stones with equal ease, in effect, and so it tends to produce a much flatter surface. So I try to avoid using sandpaper when I am carving Goodletite. The only place I use sandpaper is on this flat surface here, where I sometimes get bald spots that are very hard to get out without sandpaper. So sometimes 1,000 grit sandpaper just to get rid of bald spots on there, but the rest is ready. So now I'm going to move to the smoothing phase. Now the smoothing phase involves the use of a slightly different disc on the lap machine, and that's these guys. So these are a semi-soft diamond impregnated material. They're hard to the touch. You can't tell that they're soft. They're slightly softer than steel, and it's basically a very, very hard synthetic fabric with diamond impregnated in it. And I'm going to start down a grit. So I'm dropping back down to 800 with the smoothing, and then we'll go 800, 1200, and then maybe 3000. But I'll show you the effect that just the 800 smoothing disc has already on this. So take a note, it's very dull. There's no real sort of polish to it. And even though I'm only going to the smoothing phase, that should really fix this up quite a bit. And hopefully we'll see fewer of those vertical lines running down the stone. So let's go to the smoothing phase. So after the 1200 smoothing, we'll give this a dry again. Now we should see even more beauty coming through. Now it's really starting to look pretty decent. That patch in the middle here is gone. Now you can start seeing here on this face, you can start seeing a little bit the tourmaline. These darker dots are just sitting above the rest. So I'm getting to the point now where continuing with these slightly softer discs is also starting to undercut slightly, just like sandpaper does. Now this is because I did some flat sanding here with sandpaper, so it's already starting to just not be quite as flat as I would like. Up here where I stuck with the diamond disc, it's a little bit better. Now I've got to be careful that I don't go for too long on the smoothing discs because they'll start to undercut. The back looks really good. Now I'm going to change to the 3000 grit. This is the last smoothing disc, the orange one. And we have to be careful that I don't stay too long on the orange disc. So it'll probably be about 2 minutes or 3 minutes of just smoothing on the 3000 grit smoothing disc. And then we'll move to the polishing phase. Right, that's smoothing done. So same drill, get a bit of paper, try and get rid of the excess water. I'm going to get a second piece here because it's quite damp. My hands are very damp as well. Okay, there we go. that is basically done now. As far as smoothing and cutting goes, or cutting and smoothing goes, now we'll move to the polish. But before I go to polish, I like to bring it outside into natural light. So before we were indoors, and this is a overcast day here, overcast, so no direct bright sunlight, but that is pretty good. There's lots of, I mean, it looks like it's polished already, but it's not. So we're done with all of the smoothing. Now the final polishing phase begins. This is the pad we use. This is a dense felt lap disc, and we're going to be using diamond paste. So I'm just going to get this fixed to the machine. You can take the water guard off because there's not going to be any water. Then this is the diamond paste I use. This is the diamond paste I use. 15,000 grit. So I put a little bit on the pad first, and then a little bit on the talkie or the Goodletite. So we're going to put, I just put a strip down the back, strip on the front. Now this is extremely slippery. It is now oiled, and it's very easy for this to slide off the lap disc and it will fly across the room. I do have this plastic shield on the outside, but if it flies out the front, then it can hit something and broke. So I have chipped items before in this final phase because they've slipped off the disc and then they've hit something and chipped. So you've got to be super careful with the polishing. But let's get on with that then. There we have it. Let's see if I can get the camera to focus. Polished. Now you can see the sort of greasy finger marks. That's still some oil on my fingers. So we'll take this out in the sunlight now, so you can see the final result. There we have it. Polished. Final piece. The oil has now been removed, and it's basically in its final condition. All I have to do is drill the hole here for the binding, which I'll do, and then I'll have to tidy that up afterwards as well. It'll need its own little polish. These are the notches in here. They've still got a bit of the polish showing, which I'll just have to get rid of with a toothbrush. There we go. So that is how I get Goodletite up to this very high gloss polishy finish. Cutting, smoothing, and then polishing.